The protagonist, Mark Watney, collects soil samples for analysis, communicating with the astronauts and colleagues. Suddenly, updated weather carriers come on the basis. A powerful storm is approaching them. Her impulses can demolish the runway, without which returning to orbit and home becomes extremely problematic. The commander gives the order to prepare for takeoff. During movement from the base to the module, the crew encounters a strong wind and small fragments. Watney loses consciousness when he blows it off the broken antenna. The damaged spacesuit ceases to give signals, and the astronauts cannot find it, leaving his body on someone else's planet. On Earth, NASA at a press conference reports that the mission of Ares 3 is returning home, and Mark Watney died. However, the rumors of his death are greatly exaggerated. Watney comes to his senses, sprinkled with Martian sand. Oxygen in the spacesuit ends, and he urgently needs to get to the base despite the injury. The metal pins stuck into the stomach, and the frozen blood clogged the hole in the spacesuit. He manages to get to the base and provide first aid. Having processed the wound, he is aware of the scale of the tragedy. He is alone on a foreign planet. In the edification of the descendants, Mark leads the onboard magazine. The situation is extremely unenviable, and the prospects are foggy. He begins to keep records of the remaining products to understand how many days there is enough food. Reserves are enough for a maximum of a year, so he needs to organize a garden to grow food for another 3 years. In this, biological waste from the toilet and a supply of potatoes on the day of Thanksgiving will help him. Mark equips a mini Ogre in one compartment, hesitates with polyethylene, imports the soil from local sand, and fertilizes it with compressed feces. In the resulting soil, he plants chopped potatoes and waters vegetables with water. However, a new problem arises, a deficiency of water. To get more fluids, Mark uses his knowledge in chemistry and tries to overtake the remnants of rocket fuel into the water. Unfortunately, the first attempt ends with an explosion due to an error in the calculations. But after corrections, everything turns out. In the fenced area, water begins to condensate, irrigating the garden. After some time, Mark sees the first green sprout. At this time, NASA employees are preparing for the next mission to Mars, but to check the state of the Ares 3 base after the storm, satellites are needed, which are not given access, including from moral and ethical reasons. The leadership does not want the photographs of the corpse of Mark Watney to spoil the company's reputation. Nevertheless, the head of the program manages to convince the bosses, and this leads to shocking results. In satellite images, it is clear that the survivor remained on the basis. However, it is impossible to just take and save it. The preparation of flight requires a lot of time and calculations. Inspired by the fact that he was able to create an agricultural economy on Mars, Mark begins to plan how to leave the red planet. The next mission of NASA Ares 4 should land 3,200 kilometers from its current location, and he needs to be there when they fly home. This requires how to overcome this distance. Given the speed of the rover, it will take 50 days on the road, and all this time, he will have to live inside the transport. To increase the operability of the batteries, Mark decides to dig a radioactive thermogenerator, which will save on heating. However, if he damages him, the radiation will kill the astronaut faster than hunger and cold. NASA is monitored by his journey on the Markway and come to the conclusion that he was moving to the future plan of the Ares 4 landing. To provide assistance, it was decided to send a cargo ship to it with humanitarian aid, which will take 6 months. After a month and a half, Mark collects a potato crop. But no food supplies will help him survive without communication with the Earth. Watney does not know that a mission is already being prepared there for his salvation. He goes to the Mars Propiter apparatus, which in 1997 became the first researcher of Mars. Watney dug a device from the sand and tries to launch it. He succeeds, and on the ground they receive a signal from the device, which was turned off for several decades. The brand manages to send a message to NASA, and the answer comes, they know that he is alive. However, communication is limited by the rotation of the Mars Propridist camera, and NASA can only answer yes or no to questions. To improve communication, Watney makes a circle with segments around the device. Each sector is responsible for its sign in a hexadex system. This allows you to establish a bilateral communication system. Instructions are sent to the ground for setting up the Marcod for text communication. During the correspondence, Mark learns that the Ares 3 crew is not yet aware that he is alive. This leads him out, and he sends a set of gross messages that immediately fly around the world, since the broadcast of communication is on the air. This encourages NASA to tell the crew the news. Watney makes another entry in the magazine, reporting that if someone managed to grow a crop in a new place, this is officially considered colonization. Once, due to wear of materials, the wall of the transition gateway burst, which led to explosive depressurization. As a result, a potato farm was destroyed, and the spacesuit Mark received damage. Mark copes with the latest problems with adhesive tape. Then he has to close the hole in the residential module and conduct the inventory of the remaining reserves of potatoes. This incident jeopardizes a carefully planned rescue operation. Without a harvest, Mark will not be able to hold out for a long time to meet Ares 4, so NASA decides to accelerate preparations for the start of the ship. To do this, they bring a specialist in astrodynamics who looks like a graduate of the Greenale Public College and cancel pre-fly tests. A rush leads to deployment deplorable results. An umbrella with a provision explodes shortly after the start. Chinese colleagues who have a ready-made secret carrier who can get to the orbit of Mars will learn about this. Despite the fact that this deprives their missiles and jeopardizes the Mars study program, the Chinese offer NASA help. Meanwhile, Astrodynamics completes the calculations on a supercomputer and offers the best plan for salvation with a minimum of unknown. At the meeting, he clearly demonstrates how to return Hermes, the ship of the Ares-3 mission, back to Mars. If the ship flies around the land in orbit, accelerates due to its gravity, seizes equipment from the Chinese media and return to Mars, this will extend the Ares-3 mission for another 1.5 years. During this time, if something goes wrong, the crew may die. The head of NASA prudently decides that it is mathematically unprofitable to risk 5 lives for the rescue of one, and orders to adhere to the initial plan with sending supplies. Nevertheless, NASA secretly conveys the crew of Hermes the idea of Astrodynamics with calculations. After the discussion, they unanimously decide to return to Mars for Mark and report this to the Flight Control Center, having previously hacked the ship's computer so that the control is not intercepted. Meanwhile, Mark should figure out how to get to the Ares-4 takeoff module, which previously brought materials for a future expedition. Together with China, NASA sends into space a missile carrier with supplies. Hermes intercepts the module in the orbit of the Earth, after which the Ares-3 mission goes back to Mars to pick up the colonialist. 7 months later, Mark goes to the Ares-4 module. He leaves an autograph on the wall of the residential module, loads the Mark road, puts on a spacesuit, and leaves the temporary house, not forgetting to lock the door. The path lies through the lifeless, scarlet sands of the Martian deserts. In the first journey through Mars, he will not only explore but also recharge the rover battery using solar panels. Meanwhile, in NASA, despite all the calculations, a new problem arises. Hermes cannot go into the orbit of Mars, since in this case there is not enough fuel to return. On the other hand, the Ares-4 takeoff module will not be able to rise above the lower orbit if it is not faced by 5 tons. Mark, of course, is not enthusiastic about the idea of flying, not in a full-fledged module, but he has no choice, especially since he had already reached Ares-4. In anticipation of the interplanetary taxi, Mark begins to facilitate the capsule, shooting excess hatches, leading unnecessary details and throwing out reserves. On board Hermes, the captain explains the task. Watney takes off into orbit, the engines are disconnected, and it drifts. At this time, the ship calculates the point of intersection of courses, adjusts the movement, and captures the cables. On the planet, Mark says goodbye to the margin and prepares for the start, including leaving procedures. Residents of the Earth have a direct report on return. Hundreds of people watch the unique evacuation right on the street. Before the start, exhausted, Mark cannot restrain his tears and thanks the crew of Ares-3 for the fact that they returned after him. The captain gives the reverse countdown, and the take-off module, controlled by a remote pilot from Hermes, takes off. From the overload, Watney loses consciousness, and a new unforeseen situation arises. The distance from the module to the ship is too large, and the brand cannot be intercepted. 40 minutes remain to find a solution. Hermes burns fuel to fly closer, but the speed is still too high for interception. Mark comes to his senses and gets in touch. He has an idea: to pierce the spacesuit and, like an iron person, fly in zero gravity on the reactive stream of outgoing air. This is dangerous since interception will have to be done by eye, but there is no alternative. The captain temporarily disconnects the connection with the land to discuss a new idea. They decide to blow up the Hermes gateway to release air and thus slow down the movement and equal the module. But even with an ideal combination of circumstances, the distance will be too large and no cable will not be enough. The explosion and air emissions slightly slow down the ship. The captain goes out with a jet satchel into outer space and moves to the module as close as the cable allows. Flying by, Mark pierces the spacesuit glove, and the reactive traction of the outgoing air is enough for him to fly to the captain. They grab hands, but the power of inertia takes Mark further. He barely manages to cling to the safety cable. Hermes reports this to Earth, where crowds of people rejoice. In the next scene, Mark Watney sits on a bench on the ground and drinks coffee. He notices a tiny green sprout, which was penetrating through pebbles at the feet, the quintessence of the desire for life. NASA cadets run by. They respectfully greet him. Mark heads the selection of candidates for astronauts and gives lectures on survival in difficult conditions because he has the richest experience in this matter. I also advise you to watch other videos on my channel. Good luck!